Chapter 1. Thanksgiving Bombshell. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey, filled with the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Andrew stood near the fireplace, sipping a modest glass of wine, watching the people who had become his extended family over the past 21 years. Julia's family, loud, expressive, opinionated, always quick with a joke and even quicker to judge. He had spent the entire morning helping Julia set up the house. He cleaned the porch, steamed the tablecloths, arranged the centerpiece she insisted needed Pinterest energy, and even picked up her aunt from the airport. Not once had she said, "Thank you." But Andrew didn't mind. That's just how he'd always been, quiet, dependable, the man who did things without needing applause. Julia was radiant tonight. Or rather, she wanted to be. Her dress hugged her frame tighter than usual, a deep burgundy number that dipped lower than she typically wore around family. She laughed a little too loud at Brad's jokes. Brad, her cousin's husband. Her hand lingered too long on his arm when he complimented her cranberry sauce. Andrew noticed, but he didn't react. He had seen the signs, those subtle shifts in behavior over the past few months, new lingerie she never wore for him, staying late for work functions she never used to attend, hiding her phone under her pillow. Andrew wasn't a fool. He just wasn't ready to believe the worst. Until now. The dining room was packed with 20-something relatives, toddlers tugging at tablecloths, uncles barking about politics, and Julia playing the perfect host. She was seated at the head of the table, across from Andrew, her wine glass full, her cheeks flushed. "So, Andrew," Uncle Phil called out, his mouth half full, "what's it like being married to the family hurricane over there?" Everyone chuckled. Andrew offered a polite smile. "She keeps life interesting." Julia raised her glass. "That's code for exhausting, by the way." More laughter. Andrew chuckled softly, looking down at his plate. Then came the moment that would slice through him like a serrated knife. "Come on, Jules," her cousin Tina teased. "You've got him trained." The man folds napkins like he's on Top Chef. "Oh, please." Julia rolled her eyes and laughed. "Andrew? He's just helping with the bills." The room roared with laughter. Andrew blinked. He froze for half a second. His fork hovered above his sweet potatoes. Someone gasped. Another laughed even harder. "Damn," Brad howled, pounding the table. Poor Andrew, reduced to a utility bill. Andrew looked up and locked eyes with Julia. She didn't even flinch. She sipped her wine like it was all just one big joke. The laughter still rang through the room when Julia leaned toward Brad, lowering her voice just enough. "I'm basically single anyway," she whispered. "I mean, technically." Andrew heard it. He wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. Her words just hit him like an open palm across the face. Time slowed. The clinking of silverware faded, replaced by a rushing noise in his ears. "I'm basically single." His hands went cold. His vision sharpened like glass. He excused himself without saying a word, setting his napkin gently beside his plate. No drama. No outburst. "Bathroom?" her sister asked as he stepped away. "Kitchen," Andrew said calmly. "Need a minute." He walked through the hallway, into the warm, dimly lit kitchen that only moments ago had been filled with the smells of butter and herbs. The room now felt sterile, cold, as if it already knew the end of a chapter had arrived. He stood there for a moment, the ticking of the wall clock growing louder in his head. Then, without hesitation, Andrew pulled out his phone. He scrolled past dozens of contacts until he found the one labeled Mason Green Light. He pressed it. The line picked up after 2 rings. "Andrew," a calm, deep voice answered. "That the signal?" "Yes," Andrew said plainly. "It's time. Push everything. Full burn." "Copy that," Mason replied. "It's done." Andrew ended the call and placed the phone back in his pocket. He took a slow breath and looked out the kitchen window, watching the trees sway in the cold November wind. He thought of every night he stayed late to build their business. Every holiday he sacrificed to provide. Every smile he faked when she was too tired for intimacy. And now, she was basically single. The man who sacrificed everything had been reduced to a punchline, just helping with the bills. He straightened his shirt, took one final deep breath, and walked back to the dining room. The noise returned as soon as he entered, plates scraping, drinks being poured, someone asking where the whipped cream had gone. Julia spotted him and waved her wine glass. "Hey, you okay, babe?" "You vanished." He smiled softly, the kind of smile someone wears when they're about to turn the page for good. Before he could answer, Julia's phone buzzed on the table. Once, twice, then again. Her smile faltered. She looked down. Another buzz. And another. The screen lit up in rapid bursts. Incoming call. Megan. HR, incoming call. Linda. Your lawyer, incoming call. Sophie, realtor, incoming call. Brad, work, incoming call. Account freeze notice, incoming call. Do not ignore. Andrew's lawyer, whoa, Brad said, leaning over. You okay? Julia's fingers trembled as she picked up her phone. 44 missed calls. Excuse me, she whispered, pushing back her chair. Her face had gone pale. Andrew sat down calmly, picked up his fork, and began to eat again. Her life was about to unravel. Chapter 2. The Subtle Red Flags. It began like a breeze, changing direction, too gentle to notice at first, just a shift in the air that only a man in love could feel. Andrew couldn't pinpoint the exact moment Julia began change. It wasn't one massive thing. It was dozens of little things spread out like breadcrumbs leading into darkness. 3 months before Thanksgiving, Julia started staying late at work more often. It's just chaos at the office, she'd say. Brushing her hand through her hair, she changed into more casual clothes after walking in at 9:30 p.m. I'm training a new assistant, and the Q4 audit is a mess. Andrew believed her. Why wouldn't he? She was the organized one, the sharp, competent marketing director who always had her phone buzzing and her mind running 10 miles ahead. She was his wife, his Julia. But then came the secret of texting. It began with her giggling to herself over messages during dinner. Her phone, which used to rest face up on the table without concern, was suddenly flipped over every time it buzzed. Sometimes, she'd get up and leave the room entirely just to read a message. Andrew noticed. Of course he did. "Who's so funny?" he asked one night, trying to keep his tone playful. "Oh, it's just Trish," Julia replied quickly, eyes darting. "You know how she gets when she's wine drunk." Andrew nodded and smiled, but the answer sat wrong in his chest. He knew Trish. Trish was always too busy with her 3 kids to send rapid-fire texts at midnight. And Julia hated wine-drunk Trish. She used those exact words last year when they unfriended each other for a week over a snide baby shower comment. Still, Andrew said nothing. He chalked it up to stress. Julia had been working more. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she was tired. He reminded himself that long marriages had seasons. They weren't always burning hot. Sometimes they cooled. But the intimacy began to vanish like steam on cold glass. It started with subtle avoidance. Julia stopped leaning in him on the couch during their weekend Netflix marathons. She stopped touching him at all, unless it was in passing, a cold hand on his shoulder to get by, a quick pat on the arm when thanking him for running errands. When they lay in bed at night, she curled away from him, facing the wall, her phone glowing under the covers. Once, around 2 a.m., Andrew stirred and glanced over, half asleep. Her screen lit her face, eyes flickering as she typed something furiously. "You okay?" he mumbled. She startled, pulling the phone down. "Yeah, just. Couldn't sleep. Reading some stuff for work." "Come here," he whispered, reaching a hand across the sheets. But she hesitated just a moment too long. Then she sighed and said, "I'm tired, babe. Big day tomorrow." He lay back and stared at the ceiling. For hours. Andrew tried harder after that. He planned a weekend getaway, just the two of them, upstate, at a cozy cabin they used to visit during their younger years. He booked the same room, same hot tub under the stars, same damn bottle of Merlot she used to beg him to find. But she canceled 2 days before the trip. "There's a board meeting," she explained, barely looking up from her phone. "I can't miss it. The timing's just off." He nodded. "We can reschedule." "Yeah, sure. Soon." It never happened. Andrew's mind began to spiral. He'd always prided himself on not being the jealous type. He trusted Julia. That trust had been earned over 2 decades of building a life together. A modest home, a shared business, a long stretch of inside jokes and comfort that other couples envied. But now, for the first time, he felt disposable. like a placeholder. One night, he sat outside on the porch with a bourbon in hand, watching the sky lose its light. He scrolled through photos on his phone, old ones. Julia laughing at the lake. Julia sneaking frosting from their anniversary cake. Julia in a hoodie on their road trip through the Rockies, flipping him off with a chocolate smudge on her nose. What happened to that Julia? He stared at a selfie they took on their 20th anniversary, barely a year ago. Her smile then looked real. He could feel the warmth behind it. Now, when she smiled, it was tight, plastic, and she never took selfies with him anymore. His thoughts drifted back to last Tuesday, when Julia came home unusually late again. Her hair was tousled, and her blouse was buttoned wrong, one notch too high, almost like it had been rushed. Traffic, she muttered, avoiding his gaze. Total nightmare. You didn't answer your phone, Andrew had said. It died, she replied without missing a beat. He checked the charger later. Her phone wasn't low. It had 72% battery. That night, while she showered, Andrew opened her purse for the first time in years. Guilt chewed at him like rust. But he couldn't stop. He found a second set of receipts from a wine bar downtown. One dated the previous Saturday, a night she'd said she was staying late at the office. 2 glasses, 2 entrees, 1 dessert. No name on the receipt, just a bill for $84.32. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He wasn't ready for the truth. He needed to be sure. He needed to protect himself first, emotionally, financially. He needed to watch before he acted. Andrew wasn't dumb. He'd built a life from nothing with calloused hands and tireless work. He didn't just hand over the keys to his world without damn good reason. But now, all the small signs, her coldness, the silence, the lies, the looks at her phone, the perfume she didn't wear for him, the strange tension in her body whenever he touched her, they started to connect like puzzle pieces with jagged edges. Julia was drifting away. No, not drifting. Choosing to leave, emotionally, intimately, quietly, one secret at a time. And Andrew could feel the balance of his life slowly begin to tilt. Chapter 3. The Sting of Humiliation. Andrew had never liked crowds, but he had tolerated Julia's sprawling family gatherings for her sake. Thanksgiving was the crown jewel of those traditions. 20-plus relatives wedged around a mismatched fleet of tables, a soundtrack of clattering silverware and overlapping conversations, and Julia presiding like a queen in her burgundy dress. All day he had smiled, carved turkey, offered refills, and kept the toddlers from pulling down the tablecloth, duties he'd performed happily for years. Yet tonight, every gesture felt scraped raw. Julia's dismissive line, "He's just helping with the bills," still echoed in his skull like a hammer on sheet metal. He could replay the moment in perfect clarity. The hush that fell for half a heartbeat, then the collective guffaw that rose like a pack of hyenas. Andrew saw Brad throw his head back, slapping the table, tears of laughter at the corners of his eyes. He saw Aunt Denise wipe gravy off her chin as she shook with mirth. Even Julia's mother had pressed a napkin to her lips, failing to hide a smirk. And Julia? She'd looked triumphant, almost flirtatious, chin lifted, wine glass aloft, her gaze flicking to Brad as if seeking approval. Andrew's cheeks burned. Not a single person noticed the way his grip tightened around the stem of his glass until his knuckles whitened. No one saw him swallow hard, fighting the acidic rise of humiliation in his throat. He was overwhelmed by the desire to stand up and shout, "Do you know how many nights I worked until dawn so she could finish grad school? How many vacations I gave up so this family could sit here eating my food?" Instead, he sat perfectly still. The conversation rolled on, like a man watching a play from inside the stage. He observed each little cruelty disguised as humor. Brad traced the rim of his glass, winked at Julia, and said loudly, "Hey, if you're basically single, you'd better start paying your own rent, right?" Another round of laughter. Someone whistled. Julia's cousin Tina raised her phone as if to record the spectacle for social media. Andrew felt his stomach churn. He caught snippets. Probably can't even fix a sink without calling a guy. Bet Julia makes more than he ever will. Nice of him to keep the lights on, though. It was open season mockery, and he was the prize turkey. He tried to meet Julia's eyes, searching for a flicker of remorse. but all he saw was the sharp glint of self-satisfaction. She brushed a stray hair behind her ear, leaned forward, and whispered something to Brad that made the man's ears turn pink. Andrew heard the whisper, a single, dagger-sharp word. Tonight. Brad's grin widened. Andrew's heart cracked, but his expression never shifted. A lifetime of Midwestern restraint held him in check. Don't cause a scene. Don't give them more ammunition. Yet deep inside, something older and harder than heartbreak began to brew. He folded his hands in his lap and took inventory of the room. Brad sat at the far end, cousin-in-law, salesman, serial flirt. Julia was glued to him like iron to a magnet. Tina, the self-appointed videographer, always hungry for viral content. Uncle Phil, already drunk enough to misplace propriety. Aunt Denise, who relished gossip the way a beagle relishes scent. Andrew's eyes roamed from face to face, imprinting details, listening for weaknesses the way a carpenter listens for hollow spots in a wall before hammering. Aunt Denise leaned across and whispered, loudly enough for several to hear. I always said Julia could do better. She's a catch. Julia laughed, a sharp, bright sound like glass chimes. Don't worry, Andy. I'm exploring my options. Laughter again. Someone clinked a fork on a wine glass for a mock toast. Two options, the table cheered. Andrew's pulse thudded. The humiliation was no longer just a sting. It was a molten brand searing into his identity. But outwardly he remained the picture of calm, his breathing slow and measured, a polite half-smile cemented on his face. Under the table, his phone buzzed once. Mason's silent confirmation that the gears he'd set in motion from the kitchen were already turning. Breathe, he told himself, feeling the vibration like a secret handshake. You're not broken. You're waking up. Dessert arrived, pecan pie, Julia's favorite. Andrew sliced generous portions for everyone else, leaving his own untouched. He listened to the swirl of commentary, joking debates about calories, playful jabs at New Year's resolutions. All normal, all harmless on the surface. Yet each laugh now sounded brittle. Every clink of glass was a chisel tapping a new fissure in the life he thought he understood. Julia lifted a forkful of pie to Brad's lips. Try this, she purred. Brad obliged, licking a smear of syrup from his thumb in exaggerated appreciation. Andrew's chest tightened, but his face showed nothing. He was studying them, studying her, with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under glass. That distance kept him steady. When Brad excused himself to the restroom, Andrew rose too. He strolled to the sideboard, refilled the water pitcher, and casually set his phone against a decorative pumpkin, camera facing the table. One tap, record. No one noticed. He returned to his seat, letting the phone capture every flirtatious glance, every careless insult, every damning admission that would later play back in crisp 4K detail. Minutes crawled by. Brad returned. Julia scooted closer, and Andrew memorialized it all. Brad's hand on Julia's knee, Julia's playful swat, her leaning in his shoulder while pretending to steady herself as she laughed. Evidence, each frame a nail in the coffin of any excuse she might invent. Through it all, Andrew remained silent. Invisible, he refilled glasses, passed napkins, and thanked people for coming all this way. Inside, however, he was mapping routes, legal, financial, logistical. Questions coursed through his mind with razor clarity. Joint accounts? Move funds? House deed? Confirm sole ownership transfer? Business shares? Lock board support? Phone records? Pull backups tonight. For every barb thrown at him, he answered with one more mental checkbox ticked. The louder they laughed, the faster his strategy crystallized. Julia finally glanced at him, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere. Everything okay, hon? She asked, that performative concern ringing hollow. Perfect, Andrew replied softly. He met her gaze, let her search his calm eyes, and gave nothing away. She turned back to Brad, but her brows knitted, just a flicker of confusion. Andrew wondered if she noticed the faint tremor in her own voice when she laughed again. Perhaps she felt the air cooling around him, since the tectonic plates beneath their marriage beginning to grind. By the time coffee was served, Andrew's humiliation had forged itself into something solid. Not rage. Rage was loud and sloppy. This was colder, sharper. Revenge was a word that felt too impulsive. What he envisioned was consequence. A fair reckoning. He smiled politely at jokes he no longer heard. His mind was elsewhere, opening invisible filing cabinets, collecting digital breadcrumbs, rehearsing conversations with attorneys he would soon contact. The ache in his chest subsided, replaced by a steady, purposeful rhythm like a war drum in the distance. No one noticed how rarely he blinked. No one saw his thumb scroll discreetly beneath the table, saving names, screenshots, timestamps into a hidden folder. No one saw the exact instant the loyal, self-doubting husband ceased to exist and something colder, wiser took his place. We witness a broken man quietly sitting at the dinner table, unnoticed, while a plan of silent revenge begins forming in his mind. He starts documenting and preparing, hiding his rage behind calm eyes. Chapter 4. The Revelation. Andrew sat alone in his study, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the window pane, but inside, it was quiet, eerily so. His hands rested on the keyboard, unmoving. The cursor blinked like a ticking bomb, and in many ways, it was. Weeks had passed since the Thanksgiving disaster, but the memory was as fresh as an open wound. Julia's laughter still rang in his ears. Brad's smug smirk still taunted him in dreams. The cruelty, the betrayal, it hadn't faded. If anything, it had fermented into something far more potent. Andrew had always been methodical. That quality served him well in business, and now it anchored him in this storm. He'd begun by pulling small threads, just to see if they led anywhere. Now, the whole tapestry was unraveling in his hands. It started with the security footage. Their home security system had been upgraded a year ago, Julia's suggestion. Ironically, she wanted to feel safer. Little did she know it would become the first domino in her downfall. Andrew accessed the cloud archive, searching through motion alerts while Julia slept upstairs. One clip, timestamped 2 months before Thanksgiving, caught his attention. Julia, dressed far too nicely for a quick grocery run, pausing in the driveway. A black SUV pulled up. She opened the passenger door, slid in, and the car sped off. The plates were partially obscured, but Andrew knew the shape, the make, the driver. Brad. His pulse quickened. He rewound, watched again, paused. The hug, the lingering kiss on the cheek. The way Julia glanced nervously at the camera as the door shut behind her. That one video set the tone for everything that followed. He went deeper. Julia's phone habits had changed in recent months. Always on silent, face down, locked with a new passcode. But Andrew had access to the phone records through their shared carrier. It took 15 minutes and some minor sleuthing to uncover the frequency and consistency of calls and texts to Brad's number. Late-night messages, midday calls, weekend bursts of back-and-forth texting that lined up with her brunch with the girls, excuses. Dozens, hundreds of communications over 3 months. He printed out the logs, highlighting the patterns. He wasn't just documenting a suspicion anymore. He was building a case. But the proof didn't stop there. He installed a GPS tracker beneath Julia's car, buried discreetly behind the rear bumper. The data streamed to his phone in real time. He cross-referenced her alibis with the locations pinged by the device. Yoga class? She was at a Days and 20 minutes across town. Lunch with Tina? She spent the afternoon in a suburban neighborhood, 2 blocks from Brad and Melissa's house. Late shift at the clinic? The GPS put her at a local hiking trail parking lot for nearly 2 hours. Again, right next to Brad's SUV. Still, Andrew wanted airtight evidence. So he made a call. "Mike, I need your help," he said quietly into the phone. His old college roommate, Mike, now ran a small but effective private investigation firm. No questions, no judgment. Just results. Within days, Andrew had what he needed. Photos, videos, time-stamped, high-resolution images of Julia and Brad meeting in motel parking lots, ducking into cafes, leaning into each other at traffic lights. One grainy but damning photo showed Julia straddling Brad in the front seat of his car, her head on his chest, eyes closed, a smile of twisted contentment on her lips. But what broke Andrew wasn't the images. It was the texts. Mike had cloned Julia's phone through a mirrored SIM during one of her spa appointments. The result? Full access to her messaging history with Brad. And what Andrew read tore through him like shrapnel. Jules. He's so boring. I feel dead around him. Brad. Then let him pay your bills while we live. Jules. It's almost fun making a fool out of him. He still brings me flowers like a puppy. Brad. You deserve better. You deserve someone who makes you feel alive in every way. Jules. That night at the cabin. I still think about it every time I fake it with Andrew. Andrew had stared at that last message until the words blurred. Rage wasn't enough to describe what burned in him. It was betrayal sharpened into a knife, driven directly into his heart, twisted with every smirking emoji she'd added. He didn't cry. Instead, he whispered, "All right." Then he started printing every photo, every transcript, every phone log, every GPS trail. He compiled it all into a neatly organized folder labeled Truth. Page after page, labeled and dated, categorized by lie. There would be no denials, no gaslighting. When the time came, it would hit with the force of a freight train. But not yet. Andrew began moving with intention. He met with a lawyer, quietly, off the books. He adjusted his will, rerouted joint accounts to solo holdings, restructured the trust that owned their house. Slowly, piece by piece, he moved his financial world out from under her feet while she laughed with her lover. At night, she curled beside him in bed, never noticing the distance in his eyes. She kissed his cheek, whispered tired excuses, then rolled over to text Brad under the covers. Andrew said nothing. He waited, and with every passing day, he felt the pain begin to calcify into purpose. Julia had expected a passive man, a doormat, a soft-hearted fool too afraid to walk away. What she didn't realize was that Andrew hadn't walked away. He was standing very still because he was planning how to burn everything down. Photos, videos, texts, everything is laid bare. The betrayal becomes a burning wound. But Andrew doesn't lash out. Not yet. He plots something bigger. Nuclear. Chapter 5. The Setup. Andrew stood by the window of his home office, staring out at the rain-soaked streets. The house felt colder now, despite the warmth of the autumn evening. Julia's laughter from upstairs was distant, hollow, a cruel reminder of how much had already changed without her noticing. He didn't feel like shouting, or crying, or begging for answers. He felt something far quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. He felt resolve. The phone call he made on Thanksgiving night had been the first domino in a chain that now stretched through every corner of his life. That single, deliberate ring had activated everything. He slid his laptop closed and pulled out a slim black notebook, one he had carried everywhere for the past 2 weeks. It was filled with names, numbers, passwords, and plans. Andrew flipped to the first page. Step 1. Legal. He'd already booked a confidential meeting with a divorce attorney, Melissa Crane, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer known for handling high-stakes cases quietly. No one outside their circle knew she existed. Andrew had met her through a mutual friend years ago, but never imagined he'd need her now. The meeting had been brief, but revealing. Melissa leaned forward across her mahogany desk, eyes steely behind thin glasses. Andrew, if you want this done right, you need to act fast and decisively. Assets, custody, business control, it's all a battlefield. And you can't afford to give her a single inch. He nodded. I'm ready. She smiled grimly. Good. Because your wife's already crossed the line. I've started preparing the paperwork. I'll handle the filings as soon as you say the word. Back home, Andrew transferred full ownership of their jointly held properties and accounts into his name. He knew Julia trusted him implicitly. After all, she'd treated him like a placeholder, just helping with the bills. That confidence was her weakness. She never suspected he'd be this meticulous. Late at night, he sat for hours in front of the bank's online portals, quietly revoking her access to all shared credit cards and accounts. The corporate accounts she'd managed were gradually frozen and moved under his direct control. He even set up alerts on all activity. Any attempt to access those funds would trigger an immediate notification. He called in favors next, from college friends now working in law enforcement to former colleagues who had risen through the ranks of corporate finance. Andrew reached out quietly. There were no grand speeches or dramatic meetings, just terse calls and secure messages. Brad Thompson's career ends here, Andrew said in a voice cold as steel during one phone call. I want everything. Background, HR files, any complaints. If there's dirt, I want it. Got you, replied Marcus, a former FBI analyst now working as a corporate investigator. If he's as careless as you say, this will be easier than you think. The web tightened. Brad's reputation had been spotless, or so everyone thought. But every man has a skeleton, and Marcus promised to dig until he found it. Meanwhile, Andrew set his sights on their business, the consultancy Julia had once co-managed with him, a venture they'd built slowly over a decade, once a source of pride and partnership. Now it was just another weapon. The business was already incorporated under a partnership agreement that gave Andrew majority ownership, but Julia had been the public face for many clients, the friendly co-founder who charmed away doubts. Andrew began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming control. Emails were sent from his secure account, clients were contacted personally, and Julia's role was quietly diminished without raising alarms. Don't worry, he said to his assistant, Michelle, during a private meeting. This is about protecting what we built and making sure the right people know who's in charge now. Michelle nodded, loyal but uneasy. It'll hit her hard. Good. It's time she felt what betrayal really costs. One night, as he compiled files for what he called the final phase, Andrew drafted a press release, a carefully worded statement targeting Brad's professional standing. The affair with Julia was just the beginning. The real leverage was exposing Brad's double life to his employers, colleagues, and community. The statement would reveal the affair, the lies, and the betrayal, not just of Andrew, but of every client and partner who trusted Brad. No names were spared. No reputation would be left untouched. He proofread it again, his fingers steady on the keyboard. Then, with a quiet breath, he sent it to his closest ally in the media, a former journalist who owed him a favor and was eager for a scandal with Bite. Andrew closed his eyes. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense anymore. This was nuclear. This was obliteration. When Julia confronted him the morning after Thanksgiving, her face pale and eyes wild with confusion, Andrew only smiled, calm, collected, and far beyond the reach of her desperation. You really thought you could humiliate me, he said softly, and get away with it? That I'd just disappear? Julia's lip trembled. Andrew, I know. Save it. He held up the printed folder thick with evidence. I've been watching, listening, and planning. Your little secret is about to become everyone's nightmare. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The room seemed to shrink around her as the weight of what was coming settled in. Andrew walked past her and out the door, leaving silence behind. That phone call on Thanksgiving night, the one she didn't see me make, that was the trigger. The first domino falling. The beginning of the end. Everything was in motion now. Chapter 6. The fall begins. Julia woke up with a dull ache behind her eyes, the kind that didn't go away with coffee or sunshine. The morning light peeked through the curtains, cold and unforgiving, much like the storm brewing inside her life. She reached for her phone on the bedside table. Instinctively, she expected the usual barrage of texts, some from Brad, some from friends she'd leaned on during late nights of whispered promises and reckless laughter. But instead, the screen was an assault. 44 missed calls. And counting. Her thumb hovered over the first voicemail. Julia, it's Marcus from Brad's office. You need to call me ASAP. The board just called an emergency meeting. Things are spiraling fast. The message ended abruptly. She tried logging into their joint bank account, but was met with an error. Access denied. Her stomach tightened. Panic prickled down her spine as she refreshed the page. The balance was there, somewhere, but she had no control. Her hand shook. The eviction notice sat glaring on the kitchen counter, slipped under the door last night. Final notice. Immediate payment required. The house, her home, was no longer hers. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her mother. She hesitated but answered. "Julia, I can't." Her mother's voice cracked, soaked with disappointment and fury. "How could you? You've humiliated this family. I want nothing to do with you right now." Julia's throat tightened, but no tears came. She barely recognized the woman on the other end. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know. Save your apologies. You've burned every bridge. I'm disowning you." The line went dead. Julia sank onto the kitchen floor, the phone slipping from her fingers. Her heart pounded louder than the storm outside. The walls seemed to close in. She scrambled for some semblance of control. Grabbing her keys, she rushed to Andrew's office, the place that had once felt like a shared dream, a sanctuary for their ambitions. Now it was a fortress. The office building loomed, its polished glass reflecting the gray sky. Julia's breath hitched as she stepped inside, greeted by the familiar hum of printers and quiet footsteps. "Can I help you?" Michelle's voice was cool, but not unkind. Andrew's assistant stood behind a reception desk, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "Where's Andrew?" Julia's voice cracked, but she tried to steady it. Michelle handed her a crisp, white envelope. No words, just the envelope. Julia's fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. "You're free now, just like you wanted. E." Her knees buckled. The office spun. She looked up, but Michelle was already walking away, leaving Julia alone with the cold truth. Outside, the calls kept coming. Brad's company was in chaos. Word of the affair and the scandalous press release had gone viral. The man she trusted, loved, and risked everything for was fired, disgraced, and exposed. Her cousin, the one she had whispered secrets to during Thanksgiving, was filing for divorce. The very foundation of her family crumbled around her. Julia slumped against the office wall, every breath a sharp reminder of the fall she hadn't seen coming. Chapter 7. Begging for Mercy. The front door slammed open just as Andrew was settling into his evening routine, pouring a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light like fire. The sound echoed through the quiet house, abrupt and harsh, shattering the calm he had so carefully built. Julia stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes rimmed red, clothes disheveled like she hadn't slept in days, or maybe hadn't cared to. Her breath came in quick, uneven gasps, the weight of everything crashing down on her. "Andrew, please." Her voice cracked, raw, and desperate. She took a step forward, but he didn't move from his spot near the kitchen island. "I need to talk," she said, voice trembling. He looked up, steady and cold. "You don't get to talk anymore, Julia." Tears spilled down her cheeks, catching the light like broken promises. "I didn't mean it. The Thanksgiving thing, the just helping with the bills, it was a stupid joke. I was trying to be funny. I still love you, Andrew. Please, just listen." His jaw clenched. Years of pain, betrayal, humiliation, everything fought to spill out, but he kept his voice calm, measured. "Love?" he repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You think love is a joke? Because laughing at me in front of your family, whispering to Brad that you're basically single, that's love?" Julia's shoulders shook with sobs. "I was angry, confused. I made mistakes, but I swear I never wanted to hurt you." Andrew walked over slowly, each step deliberate, controlled. He stopped just inches from her, the distance between them filled with years of broken trust. "Let me remind you, since you seem to forget." He pulled out his phone, swiping through messages, photos, videos, the evidence he'd collected like cold ammunition. "Here's a text from you to Brad, calling me a pathetic old fool. Remember that? Or the ones where you plotted to take everything from me behind my back." He held up a picture of Brad's office door, with Julia's name scribbled over the corporate whiteboard. "Julia's conquest," it read in mockery. Julia's face crumpled. "I was scared. You were never home. You worked too much. I worked for us, Julia. For this family. And while I was building a life for us, you were tearing it down with every lie." He let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. "Do you know what it felt like? To come home to a stranger? To hear you call me just helping with the bills like I was some charity case? You humiliated me in front of everyone I cared about. His voice dropped to a quiet, deadly calm. Julia reached out, as if to touch him, to apologize again, but Andrew stepped back. You think this is about forgiveness? It's not. He shook his head slowly, eyes hard. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you lost what I gave you. She gasped, collapsing to the floor, her sobs echoing through the room. Andrew stood over her, dignity reclaimed, but heart still aching. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Julia alone in the ruins of what once was. Chapter 8. The Lover's Misery. Brad sat alone in his empty living room, the silence deafening. The expensive leather couch beneath him felt like a throne of ashes. Gone were the days of power lunches and boardroom meetings. Now, the only summons he got were court notices and angry calls from former clients. His phone buzzed again, a notification flashing with a headline. Brad Harrison fired amid scandal. Breach of contract and infidelity ruined career. He stared at it, disbelief mingling with bitter regret. His phone rang. He let it go to voicemail. Brad, it's your wife. The message began, shaky and cold. I don't know if you're hearing this, but I'm filing for divorce. I can't live with this shame. Please don't contact me anymore. He pressed the phone down and ran a hand over his face, the weight of loss pressing down like a stone. Brad's family had turned their backs swiftly, no surprise. At the next family gathering, his name wasn't even mentioned. Invitations stopped coming. The very people he thought would stand by him vanished like smoke. Desperation took hold. He called Julia, hoping for some solace, some alliance in the wreckage. Brad, please, she said one day, voice tired and broken. I'm trying to survive. I can't do this with you dragging me down. Their relationship, once electric with illicit thrills and whispered promises, had soured into bitter resentment. They were prisoners of their own making. Julia now lived in a cramped motel room on the outskirts of town, the faded walls and threadbare sheets a far cry from the life she once flaunted. The stack of bills on the small table was a silent reminder of her fall. Each morning, she woke before dawn, slipping into the worn uniform of a waitress at a local diner, an anonymous job, far from the glamour she once knew. Next table, her manager barked as Julia poured coffee with practiced efficiency. The customers barely noticed the hollow eyes behind her forced smile. One afternoon, she caught her reflection in the diner's window, pale, drawn, the once confident woman replaced by someone who had forgotten how to hope. Julia tried to reach Andrew, her phone calls blocked or ignored. Every attempt to reclaim what she lost was met with silence or legal barriers. At night, she lay awake, haunted by the memory of Andrew's words echoing in her mind. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you lost what I gave you. Her face no longer carried the smugness of deception. It was hollow, etched with regret, bitterness, and a profound loneliness. Chapter 9. Rising from Ashes. The gym smelled of sweat, leather, and determination, a place where broken men and women came to rebuild themselves one rep at a time. Andrew wiped the beads of sweat from his brow, the weight of the past months slowly lifting with every push-up and deadlift. His muscles ached, but the pain was different now, not the ache of heartbreak, but the burn of resilience. It was here, amid the clatter of weights and the rhythmic thud of treadmills, that he first noticed Grace. She wasn't like anyone Andrew had met before. Warm eyes, easy smile, and a gentle confidence that seemed to fill the room without trying. Grace worked the front desk, but more importantly, she saw the man beneath the quiet stoicism, a man craving connection without the weight of judgment. Hey, you're getting stronger, she said one day, handing him a fresh towel. Her voice was soft but steady. Andrew looked up, surprised by the kindness. Thanks. Feels like I'm finally shaking off the past. She smiled knowingly. It's not easy, but you're here. That's what counts. Over the weeks, their brief exchanges grew into conversations. At first, they talked about small things, favorite workouts, local coffee shops, weekend plans. Then, slowly, the barriers began to fall. One evening after a particularly grueling session, Grace leaned against the locker room wall, wiping sweat from her forehead. You ever think about just walking away from it all? Starting fresh somewhere new? Andrew chuckled, a real laugh that surprised even him. Every damn day. But running away never fixed anything. You have to fight for what matters. Grace nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. I get that. And sometimes you have to let people in to really start fighting. Andrew hesitated. Trust had been shattered once too often. But something about Grace felt different, genuine. Maybe it's time to try, he admitted. Their friendship deepened, becoming the steady anchor Andrew needed. With Grace's encouragement, he started pursuing old passions, cooking, reading, even writing. Nights once spent in silence were now filled with laughter and plans for a future that no longer felt impossible. One crisp autumn afternoon, they shared coffee on a park bench, the leaves swirling around them like a fresh beginning. "You've changed," Grace said, her smile soft. Andrew looked at her, eyes clear and steady. "Not just changed. I found myself again." He no longer bore the weight of humiliation from Thanksgiving or the sting of betrayal. Instead, he stood taller, stronger, a man reclaimed. And for the first time in a long time, Andrew smiled freely, ready to embrace whatever came next. Chapter 10. The Final Encounter. The late afternoon sun poured softly through the glass windows of the little cafe on Main Street, casting warm golden hues across the bustling room. Andrew sat at a corner table, his fingers lightly intertwined with Grace's as they shared a quiet moment. Their laughter, low and genuine, mingled with the distant hum of conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. Andrew's eyes, once shadowed by betrayal and bitterness, now sparkled with calm joy. Grace's smile was the kind that reached her eyes, lighting up her entire face. They seemed to exist in a world of their own, untouched by the past that had so ruthlessly tried to break him. That's when Julia walked in. She paused, frozen just beyond the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. Time had worn on her like sandpaper, her once bright eyes now glassy and rimmed with red. Her clothes hung loosely, as if she was a shadow of the woman who had once held such control over Andrew's life. For a moment, she simply stared. Andrew noticed her immediately, the subtle tension sharpening his senses. He did not flinch, did not rush away. Instead, he calmly rose from his seat, still holding Grace's hand, and nodded once in recognition. Julia swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she approached the table. "Andrew, I just wanted to say something." Her eyes brimmed with tears she fought to keep from spilling. Grace stayed quiet but close, her gaze steady and protective. Julia's voice cracked. "I ruined everything. I was selfish and blind. You were the best thing I ever had, and I threw it away." Andrew's expression softened, but there was no mercy in his eyes, only quiet strength. "You're right," he said simply, his voice steady. The words hit Julia harder than she expected. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet truth that echoed louder than any scream. For a long moment, the three stood there, Andrew with Grace by his side, Julia overwhelmed with regret. Without another word, Andrew turned and took Grace's hand, walking out into the sunlit street. He didn't glance back. His past, his pain, his old life, it was finally behind him. Julia remained in the cafe, alone with the weight of her mistakes. As they walked away, Andrew's mind was calm, peaceful even. The humiliation, the betrayal, the dark nights filled with rage and sorrow, all transformed now into lessons that had shaped him. He looked at Grace, the woman who had helped him rebuild, and smiled. This was the man he had fought to become, stronger, wiser, and finally free. And as they stepped into the sunlight, Andrew's last thought echoed quietly in his heart. The people who laugh at your pain don't deserve to see your joy. Show it to someone who never made you cry.